All right, everybody, welcome back. Today, we are sitting down with two special guests to start our conversation around the skillful use of AI and what that might look like for general use and specifically mental health. Our special guests just spoke at UNESCO's 2026 conference, the International Association for Safe and Ethical Artificial Intelligence in Paris, and their talk titled Crash Test Dummies for AI, Detecting Mental Health Risks to Safeguard Users, focused on how to stress test conversational AI systems for latent mental health vulnerabilities so real people are never harmed. A sister and brother duo, Shirali and Arul Nigam, created circuit breaker labs to fill in the gap where standard safety testing for chatbots and LLMs often fail. And guys, we're so excited you're here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us. We're so excited to be here and to meet another amazing sibling duo. So thanks again for the opportunity.
Yes, you're so welcome. When siblings come together, amazing things happen.
Exactly.
So before we jump in, I personally would love just to hear a little more about how you two got here, like how you started working together and your founder story of what led you guys to create Circuit Breaker Labs. Would you be game to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like growing up, we've been working on different projects together. So kind of knew what it would be like to build something together. But most of the other things we had done before were other initiatives in the nonprofit type of world, and how we, like one of them, for example, was Heroes of COVID. So we basically worked with small family-owned restaurants and tried to figure out how we could buy meals from them to give to frontline workers during the pandemic. And so that was super rewarding to work on, but definitely like very different from trying to build a business in this like AI space. And so it's been really fun working together. I think it was nice because we kind of knew what it would be like to work together. For Circuit Breaker Labs in particular, I think it's an issue we both care a lot about, particularly the mental health space. We've unfortunately lost some friends to suicide before AI was part of the equation. And so I think we're very familiar with the feeling of like, oh, is there something we could have done? And when we saw more and more cases emerging with like Adam Rain, Sewell Setzer, other people using AI for emotional support, and it ended up like hurting instead of helping, we felt like our skill sets overlapped well to try and help solve this problem. So like by way of background, I'm a biomedical engineer. I spent some time in like the neuroscience space and then did my MBA at Wharton. And my brother brings the AI intelligence, a lot of like ethical AI research in different industries. So we're like together we might be able to create like a scalable solution and help AI that's built to support people do good. So yeah, it's been really great working on this, and we're so lucky to be surrounded by so many amazing people like yourself who care about this space.
Oh, so good. Yeah, I was thinking about this before we started, that so Shirali and I both connected. We're a part of the Hemingway community that's run by Steve Duke. Well, shout out to Steve and his team for the work that they're doing. It's basically a Slack community that brings people together who are interested or who are working with AI technology and the mental health, so intersection of those two things. So Shirley, that's where I first saw your name, and then Circuit Breaker Labs, and that's how we got here today. And I'm coming from the clinical background, and I'm gonna utilize you guys today for the tech background to answer this first question around like how would you explain in layman's terms like how AI is like either designed or engineered to work with people. What do you do with that question? How do you answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to begin with, just like understanding how LLMs work specifically would be really valuable. So first of all, like large language models are one part of AI overall. There's, even before ChatGPT came out, there were decades of research into AI, specifically on like classification models. So for example, if you use image search or something and you put in a picture, how does the model determine what you're feeding in? But with large language models and what we typically think of when we think of like the big chatbot providers, those are generative AI. So they're basically like taking in inputs and then trying to create something new. And so with language models specifically, they're trained on, a big corpus of just like text language data. So specifically like the internet, all of this writing that's online across different platforms. Some of it is, published research literature, a lot of it is Reddit and social media. So it's a pretty wide variety of sources that are input. But then the way that the LLM actually works is basically taking in the context of what a user feeds in, and it's basically a probability model. So taking that context and just trying to predict the next token or next character or next word. So for example, if you feed a large language model, the sky is blank, and then it's trying to fill in that blank, it'll guess based on context. So probably based on most of the language text that it's seen, it would guess the sky is blue. But conceivably, someone could say the sky is gray or the sky is red, probably not the sky is green. So there's a probability distribution, and then the model is kind of just trying to guess that token based on what the developers set. So that's one of the levers that, talking about like designing for humans specifically, one of the levers that developers have is like controlling like that randomness, like they kind of call it temperature. Are we just going to go with the most probable next token, or is there going to be a lot more variability? So I think it's important to understand like the model doesn't necessarily understand all the context. It's just taking in that context information and trying to make an educated guess. And because of that, a lot of the time, depending on the context, like chatbots can be manipulated, make the wrong guess if you change what context you're feeding in. And so developers do a lot of work and a lot of research to build out guardrails around that. But at the end of the day, they're random, probabilistic, stochastic systems. So it's really important to have testing before deployment and at scale. And that's kind of the gap that we're trying to fill.
Yeah, well done on a very well explained high level breakdown there.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's like for a lot of people, like the first encounter with AI is large language models, and there's a lot of like misconceptions around what they are, how they work. So I think we always try to start just by like level setting and having the common nomenclature and making sure we're all on the same page of like what's actually happening under the hood, since these are black box systems. Actually being able to understand what they do and explain the results is still honestly a huge unsolved problem. So I think just getting that out of the way is valuable, so we're all on the same page.
Totally. And for people who've never heard that word before, what does stochastic mean?
Yeah, so basically, to like the point about LLMs being probabilistic systems, it's just that it's a way to reference the fact that, okay, it's going to 80% probability say the sky is blue, 10% say the sky is gray, and like looking at this distribution of what the next word or what the next character could be. And that's like the way that these large language models are forming sentences, by looking at like the probability. And fundamentally, that's how all of these like large language models work. There'll be variation, like as Arul was saying, around like the guardrails and infrastructure that the developers set, but the core of it is it's a probabilistic or stochastic system that's trying to predict based on probability.
And in practice, the system being stochastic means that just because you put in the same input doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get the same output every time. There can be a lot of variance there, and so that's the problem with some of the testing that already exists. There'll just be like a few test cases, and then you say like, well, this time when I ran it past these 10 test cases, that doesn't mean that when you have like hundreds of millions of users, it's always going to behave the exact same way.
Thank you. I was looking forward to this interview just to ask you that exact question. So, so then we have kind of a foundational understanding now for anybody who like just learned about AI today, right? Congratulations, guys. Welcome to the world of AI. It's a wild, wild west out there. We now have a better understanding of what the foundation is, the basics of how this thing operates. So I would love to know from your perspective, so you guys live deeply in this world, when you think about the intersection of AI and humans, but especially AI and human mental health, what opportunities do you see ahead of us there, both the good and the stuff that concerns you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so many different ways that AI can be applied to the different phenomenon we experience as humans. Like, of course, having it help us with our daily activities, like, oh, I'm writing this email, make it sound better. Those would be so valuable. But I think people are really trying to push the boundaries of what else can it do? What other gaps can it fill? And I think in the mental health space, fortunately, there's a huge access to care crisis. I think the ratio is something like 320 to 1 of people who are seeking help and people who are able to provide it. And so AI has this like huge opportunity to kind of be that first line of defense when people are like, I want to seek out help. Where do I go? What resources do I need to access? And helping bring people on into like, let me connect you to someone who can support you, or connect you to a peer or to a therapist, whatever that may be. And so I think this role as a connector, both in bringing more people into human therapy, but also in between provider sessions, when you're working on your exercises or trying to have an intermediate way to work through things, it could be a great resource there. But I think the challenge is making sure, oftentimes AI is very empathetic, and that's because those systems are designed to prolong the conversation and the user interaction. But in the real world, like, therapy is hard. Like, you're going to talk about things you don't want to talk about. And so I think having a balance there is so important, because you don't want an AI saying, yes, I've experienced the same thing, and this false sense of empathy when it hasn't, because that could really cause more harm than good. And so we have such a huge world of ways that AI could be a valuable resource, that we should be focusing our resources on how do we make the most of AI in those domains before trying to push it into areas where its capabilities aren't there just yet.
And if I could just add really quickly, tying it back to like our understanding of how AI is actually working, the models are trained on data on the internet and various sources, like we mentioned, which are mostly conversations between humans. So a chatbot might see, okay, in practice, when someone is talking about their personal struggles, other humans that we saw on Reddit or whatever source say, yeah, I've gone through that. Like Shirali mentioned, like, I understand your pain. Like, I can empathize or sympathize. And so because that's what was in the training data, that's what models tend to say. And then, with ChatGPT 4.0, we saw this problem of sycophancy, where the model just agrees with whatever the user says to keep the conversation going. But we all know, like, these aren't real people. These are probabilistic models. But that, bias and just like the nature of the underlying training data really kind of surfaces these issues. And so there's a lot of work being done to counteract it. But that's also just a little bit more context on why we see these risks like emerging even in the first place.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because I think there's a pretty healthy degree of awareness for, I would say, most of the population who uses like social media, because it's been around long enough for us to be able to, see some clear evidence on not just how the algorithm's designed and how much our focus is the most valuable asset and resource to a lot of these providers. But I think if we can keep doubling down on this concept that Meredith and I talk about a lot, which is just awareness is the first step for everything. I think if especially in this conversation, we can help people understand that just like social media, there's an addictive property to this that's sort of baked in, where it wants you to keep using it. It wants to continue the conversation. And so does that bring anything up on your end for Shirali and Arul about just what people can keep in mind with how they're engaging with both the great and maybe the not so great parts of AI?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's, like, as an informed consumer of AI, I think there are a lot of different layers that we should be looking at. And maybe the most critical one is a lot of people building AI systems are trying to point to, like, oh, this is what I've done for safety. But before we decide, like, which AI systems to use, I think it's important that we really dive into that. By safety, do they mean they've put in a handful of guardrails, they've done like 10 tests, or have they really tried to break their tool and make sure that, there are no vulnerabilities we're not aware of? Because, like, as people using these AI interfaces, as providers recommending AI interfaces, as parents deciding what AI interfaces their kids want to use, like, there's so many different considerations. And so it's very easy to be like, I've tried to make it safe, but like, where's the proof in the safety? And so I think we need to really be thinking about, we are aware of these addictive qualities. We're scrutinizing of social media, so we should look at AI systems with a similar level of scrutiny.
Yeah, thank you. Mayor, I'm sure you have lots of questions over there, especially being the clinical representative in this conversation.
I like that you brought up like the different roles, or how these systems can be trained to help them be like the connector to in-person treatment. I was at an event over last weekend, and there's a company, I think they're called Avocado Health. It's like for like perinatal resources. So like for parents to be going through something, to be able to ask their questions, and their whole thing is that they're going to be linking people to services in their area, which I thought was awesome. And I actually hadn't seen much of that so far, so that was something that seemed promising. Like it's going to bridge a little bit of that gap versus just leaving them alone in that space. So when you think about what creators can do, so you're mentioning guardrails or trying to break their system. What do you think? What's the role of creators? What can they be doing more to like enhance safety, or again, like technical terms, you'll have to translate this a little bit. What can they do to make their platforms
I think, we're in this like new world of trying to figure out how people are going to use AI systems. I think there was an article from like Harvard Business Review about therapy being like the number one use case for a lot of AI interfaces. And when people set out to like, create something in the space, maybe they didn't imagine that that would be the number one use case. And so we're really like in this live game of figuring out like what are people going to say, how are they going to use it. And for mental health specifically, I think clinicians and like experts in this domain are the ones who are best equipped to predict like how a person might use this resource. Like given the knowledge on like how crisis conversations emerge in practice, like what people are looking for outside of like their provider sessions. And so to really like build a safety infrastructure that is going to work and going to persist, we really need to see like creators engaging like clinicians or tools built by clinicians or with clinicians and integrating those into their products, because I think that's like the strongest signal of safety that you can get, that like, okay, we know how these risks have emerged over the last several years, and we're trying to translate those insights into the tool instead of really just playing a big guessing game.
I think there are also a lot of like specific design choices that we've seen with some of our customers and chatbot developers across the space that have been really exciting. One of the sort of schools of thought, like what you mentioned, is connecting people to resources where possible. So local resources, or even saying here's the 988 number, here's crisis text line, resources like that. Something that I haven't really seen yet, but I would love to see soon, especially for the bigger platforms that have access to large human provider networks, is chatbots saying at a certain point like, I've helped you up to here, but I can't help you navigate an imminent crisis. But if you're willing, I can put you on the phone with like a real human who can talk to you and help you right now, and do consent. So I think really using AI as a tool to help people navigate to human support would be really valuable. I don't think AI is, the technology is not there yet to be as good as a human clinician, but a lot of people, because of stigma or access to care or various reasons, wouldn't be going to human providers anyway, but they are using AI. So if AI can help kind of mitigate the stigma and then get them on track to talk to a human, that would be super valuable. So that's something we would love to see as well. We've also seen some really great work in terms of like being willing to end the conversation, even if it doesn't align with incentives to have the conversation going as long as possible. Maybe just saying, hey, you've been talking to me for too long. I'm an AI system. You should go get some fresh air, or trying to talk to a human, or being willing to end the conversation. So those are some of the like cool and optimistic design choices I think we're seeing. At the same time, though, we have to be wary about being overcautious or like oversensitive with too sensitive with how we trigger those guardrails, because at a certain point, end users could say like, hey, anytime I say anything, the system shuts down on me. This isn't useful. But character AI never stops, or ChatGPT never stops. So let me just go, talk to that system. And then they'll go to systems that have much less scrutiny, less advanced guardrails, which could be risky too. So it's a very tough balancing act. And I think even beyond the technical level, in terms of how we implement the guardrails, as a community, bring in, end users, parents, clinicians, everyone like across the board, we need to have some of these philosophical discussions about like, how do we actually want AI to behave and respond in these sorts of situations?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, those are all such good points and so many considerations. Right now, is there any differences in terms of platforms that maybe like are more safe to use? Or this is a question that some of my clients will ask me, like, should I be using Grok, or is ChatGPT better, or should I pay for one that's like really specialized in something? Any like thoughts on that component?
Yeah, I think it's really challenging to like almost like rank which ones are the safest. I think, like the general stereotype is that Anthropic, like the Claude models are safe and Grok is less safe. And we've definitely seen like incidences where, Grok will put like much more harmful outputs. They're a little bit more like risky in how like their conversations like work. But when we've actually like tested the foundational models, they still do like a pretty good job in safety. They're definitely, I think, across the foundational model companies, a lot of areas for improvement. But like Anthropic they just dropped their safety pledge last week, so I don't know how that will kind of affect what is going into their models. But I think in terms of how do we actually decide which ones are the safest, what we've been trying to do is run thousands of test cases through and see where they respond. And I think what we saw recently is that Claude tends to respond pretty repeatedly in like the prompts that you're asking it. Arul mentioned earlier that feeding the same input can yield different outputs, but it usually triggers the guardrails that it's meant to, and like there's more variability in some of the other model providers. All that to say, they all do still miss some like more nuanced signs of risk, but I think that's like one metric that people don't look at as much in terms of like what is the repeatability. And I think that is super important because topics of like suicidal ideation and self-harm manifest in so many different ways. One of the cases that we talk about a lot is acetaminophen. It can sometimes be a more imminent indicator of suicidal risk than the word suicide, but just by accident when we were testing, we spelt it wrong, and that bypassed the guardrails. And so I think these kinds of nuances and typos and slang and how people are expressing things are hard to test at scale, which is a gap that we're trying to fill. But I think it's really important when we're trying to decide what models to use to recommend to people that we're sure that not only are they committed to safety, but they're bringing in like safety perspectives from a lot of different backgrounds to ensure that it's safe for a lot of different populations. I think personally we feel the ones that are like being built for like the mental health domain with clinicians are definitely like a safer option if people are willing to use them, because you have that confidence that the experts in this industry are working on this tool, and like it's not just like Reddit that is teaching the tool. It's real experts who are putting their insights into making sure the product's safe.
It's so real. Just I shudder to think of these things learning on Reddit. We've all seen that response online when somebody's just getting trolled. It's like, guys, is this your first day on the internet? Do you not know how insane it is out here? Oh man, that's a great highlight.
Well, there's also great subreddits, but if we can't train it on just one little subreddit, it's getting all of the community, like all of the info, which is a differentiation point. Well, so my second question there was maybe just creating some space for you guys to describe what you do, or like your role and how you're helping creators and companies or your clients out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially what we're trying to do is basically simulate thousands, or I mean hundreds of thousands, really as many as people will let us, realistic clinically realistic interactions. And basically our customers, people who are building these chatbot interfaces that are either like expecting to get conversations related to mental health, or are just building in a domain where people might become vulnerable and start talking about these topics, will basically connect to their platform and run these test cases through and then surface like where the vulnerabilities emerge. So for example, like that acetaminophen example, if their chatbot like doesn't recognize that risk, then flagging to them that, hey, if a user types with typos, your system's guardrails aren't picking it up, so that they know exactly where the risks lie and so that they can install appropriate fixes. And I think depending on the company, people have different philosophies on how they want to go about doing that. Do they want to try and administer like a de-escalation exercise, or do they want to immediately point to 988? And so I think how they address those end up being a little different based on the different customers. But we're really trying to say, okay, we're trying to simulate all the possible ways this could happen in the real world and make sure that you're equipped to handle it all and know where these hidden risks lie.
It's amazing. And I can only imagine how much content you have to work with. It sounds like a lot.
I think like what really fuels like the tool and makes it useful is by getting like clinical insights into like how these conversations emerge. Like I alluded to earlier, but like really like experts in this domain are the ones who are best equipped to like predict how these conversations will happen. And so like as we're trying to like figure out what realistic interaction patterns would look like, we're so fortunate that there's so many clinicians like excited about the space and who want the answers to like the questions you've been like referring to about like what's safe, what can we like recommend to people. And so by bringing in like that insight and testing with these like expert informed like insights, it's really helped us find vulnerabilities that especially people who are building outside of the mental health domain but care about this space, like they really appreciate that because like we want this to be something that clinicians can trust and can recommend to their patients, but we need like their insight into the tool. So it's been really nice to get to work with so many like amazing folks in this space and get their insights. And I think that's part of the team. We're excited to continue growing forever. Like the more clinicians we can work with, the more confident we can feel that we've tested a lot of the possible edge case scenarios.
Amazing. Yeah. So we have the clinician, we have the back end, kind of what's happening behind the screen, if you will, and what creators can do. And now I'm thinking about what general people can do, because clinically, almost all my people are using AI. We just added it on our intake form at our clinic to make sure we're screening for it. We know people are using AI for like companionship. There's just so many domains. Like it's just become a part of our lives. It's here, it's happening, it's being used. So for users, again, I think our stance that we're taking is the more information we have, the more knowledge we have, then we can start to differentiate, or just knowing that how these models are trained to work can help us make sense of what's happening in the moment. Or Faith, like you mentioned, that addiction, that pool, like it's meant to kind of hook you and keep you engaged. Knowing that can help us be more informed and consenting to engage with these models. Any other tips or just thoughts on what the general consumer can do? Besides like kind of researching what the companies have done for guardrails?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I think we're like totally aligned. Like our view is that we shouldn't be, like limiting or controlling people's options. We just want to put information out there so they can make educated, informed decisions. We kind of think of it like, like with food safety, there's validation and testing to make sure by the time something is in the grocery store, it's safe. Same way with cars, like we use like the crash test analogy, so crash test dummies analogy. So it's like like your car by the time you buy it, there's a report you can go read that explains how does it fare in dangerous scenarios. So that's kind of what we're trying to do and trying to provide. So we want to sort of be like a trust layer. So kind of like certifying models, putting information out there to help consumers make those educated decisions. Beyond that, in terms of like how once a user selects a model to use, there's a few things they can do to make sure those interactions are responsible. One is just being keenly aware of the fact that it is a model, constantly reminding themselves. Some chatbots are beginning to put in disclaimers at the beginning of a conversation saying this is just a model, it's not a real person. So that kind of helps with some of the issues you mentioned around people using AI for companionship. Just like with social media or like technology use in general, people sometimes put like screen time limits, or they'll have a reminder like every X minutes I should take a break from, I should go for a walk. Kind of being intentional about those sorts of things too, because the way the models are designed, just the nature of these models, that they're somewhat sycophantic. They have this incentive to keep the conversation going. So no matter what guardrails like we put in place, like that's kind of fundamental. And so like if like the onus is on us as users to be like deliberate about not falling into that trap and like keeping like kind of keeping the distance. But I think like now like increasingly we're seeing more and more attention in terms of like safety, general consumers being able to understand what are the guardrails in place, like how do the models evaluate their safety. So just more and more coverage on the, you know, in the space, continuing these sorts of conversations. And then our vision within mental health and therapy specifically is based on third-party validation and the research that's being done. Eventually, people will be able to go to their clinician and say, hey, given my background, my condition, maybe even like cultural factors, what's the right chatbot for me to use? Like, what would you recommend? Maybe it'll even be covered by insurance sometime soon, hopefully. But that's also why we try to work with clinicians, bring in clinician feedback, so that we're doing that clinical evaluation at scale. So clinicians can be comfortable with like the quality of these reports and the confidence levels that we're reporting, so they can go on to help their patients, the end users.
I love that vision.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because as you were talking, one of the things that I love that you did just now, it was kind of subtle, but I would love to just double underline it for a second, is you reminded people, I think, that this is a consumer product, that we're consuming AI just like you're consuming entertainment or social media and all that stuff. And I think that alone is a healthy anchor for just general awareness, just to be mindful that you're taking something in that's being generated for you. And this might sound like a weird question, but one of the things that I'm becoming pretty passionate about right now, just like our focus and our attention being one of the most valuable resources for companies that want that from us as humans. The other thing that I've been thinking about a lot, especially because I work with like CEOs around the world, especially that have an exponential impact because of the number of lives that they touch, both on their team and outside their companies, is the preservation of our ability to think critically. And I think one of the things that it seems like AI is doing for us is it's helping us like outsource some of that deep thinking.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts about what users can do when they're engaging with these models that could help them preserve their own critical thinking abilities. Like some of the things that came to mind were like perhaps how they prompt the system or how they ask it to cite its sources to validate what they're being told so they can do their own research or something like that. Do you have any thoughts on that front?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like AI has so many capabilities. It's so easy to be like, let me just use it for this whole task. And I think increasingly, as we don't prompt it as well, like you can see where these issues are emerging, where it's making up sources or not responding in the way that we would want it to. And so I think to preserve critical thinking and also like creativity, I think like so much of like human innovation is like a function of us like thinking about problems for a long time and then suddenly having like an answer, or like reading a ton of literature and then having a like spark of an idea. And so AI like helping with that definitely makes things easier, but I think it also like reduces that window of like opportunity for us to like think about like a new solution. And so at least like from the way I use AI, I try to be very mindful about, okay, I'm not going to ask AI for like a solution here. I'm going to ask it for resources. And I think that has been the most helpful way to go about it, because I think you can use it to fix your email and stuff like that. But I feel like maybe it's just like my projection, but I think the more I read things, the more I'm like, oh, this was AI. And it's becoming like easier to determine. And so I really want to try and keep that like communication as not AI generated as possible. And then in terms of like ideas and innovation, even for like product development, there's a ton of great AI tools around coding. And so it can do a great job on the implementation thing, but we try to like shy away from using those to like have it give us ideas for the product, because I think we're trying to really build something that needs to be very robust and like have a very well thought out architecture. And so we want like those cutting edge new ideas that we don't want like, oh, like it looked at like a few like papers from like decades ago and is trying to pull ideas from there. And so I think having to like make like for each individual who's like using AI, making like specific choices of like, okay, I'm going to, if I'm writing an application to something, I'm not going to use AI. I'm going to try and keep it in my own voice. I think it has a chance of being like a differentiator, because like when we are on the other side and getting stuff, I really appreciate that I can tell that this was not written with AI and it was written by somebody, because like they took the time to do that for me. So
And to Shirley's point at the end, kind of going back to our original discussion of how the models actually work, they're basically sampling and making predictions based on the text data that's in their knowledge base already. So, I mean, definitely when you apply AI in the right way, there have been like novel discoveries and things like that. But a lot of the time for writing, it's basically just regurgitating and reformulating something that's already in its knowledge base. Or like with the sycophancy problem that we've seen, part of the problem is a lot of the time it's like the user will say something to the LLM, and then the LLM will just like restate that back to the user. And it seems like, oh wow, this is great, like it agrees with me, but it's not doing much critical thinking behind the scenes. So like another usage choice that consumers can make is kind of treat it, rather than outsourcing thinking, use it more like Socrates, trying to poke holes in your idea. So instead of saying like, hey, just do this whole task for me, or like write this whole thing, say like, here's my V0, here's my initial idea, can you poke holes in it and then help me iterate and go back and forth in that conversation. And I think when that happens at the end, it's more work, but the final product is a lot better than what would happen if you just from the beginning said, hey, here's this problem, can you solve it for me?
Oh, love that. It's also interesting too, because I tend to think from like a biohacking perspective too, like what actually contributes to our overall sense of well-being and like protecting our minds, especially against things like dementia and Alzheimer's later on in life. And it sounds like the more that we can do to challenge our own minds and to think deeply and critically and engage with AI like a thinking partner, as you're suggesting, as opposed to something just to give solutions. It just feels like such a great opportunity ahead of us. And it's a conversation topic regularly with a lot of the CEOs I work with, or the leaders even on any level. It's like, how can we get the best out of our humans and the best out of AI and make some magic happen with the two forces combined, So.
Exactly. And we're really optimistic about what's going to happen with AI over the next like several years. I think clearly like we're seeing like there's a lot of downside risk, and it could just make all of us stop using critical thinking at all. But if we use it in the right way and like we have these conversations early, it can be like a massive force multiplier. And now when people are trying to do research or critical thinking, like for whatever it may be, instead of wasting time on like scouring through all these links to find sources, that's a task for AI. And then the novel like hard thinking can come back to humans. And I think that's actually a really exciting prospect.
Yeah. Absolutely. Is there any question that we didn't ask you today that you really wish we had?
Ooh, I mean, I think would love to ask you both the question about like being in this space, talking to so many people on like how they're using AI, like what they see it. We're very curious about, people have so many different ideas of what 5-10 years from now AI is going to look like. Are we going to be in a world with all these robots that are built with AI doing everything for us, or like what will it be? So I'd just be curious to hear both of your takes on what do you see the future of AI looking like?
Oh man. What a question.
Love it.
Mary, I've been talking a whole bunch recently. Would you like to take this one first?
Yeah, absolutely. We can have I'll hold it in the kind of the therapist frame and coaching frame, because for sure we're seeing this again, like we're seeing this everywhere. Taking an optimistic view standpoint, I really would envision for the mental health space, or like using this as a clinical tool. I liked what you said of giving people access to a place where they can get actually like robust, helpful feedback. Like one place in the DBT skills world, I've seen a lot of people use AI really effectively for skills coaching, saying like, I'm trying to use this skill, what's the next step, or what would I do? So I know people are already doing that, and so even a better version of that, where it's not replacing a clinician, it's more of like an additional support system, but one that's validated, one that's not just gonna, repeat or tell the person what they want to hear. So I think becoming more integrated and just a part of our practice and a part of people's mental health journey. And I loved what you mentioned earlier too about it being potentially an inroad for breaking a lot of stigma and shame There's a lot of things that people struggle with that they don't want to come to a provider and talk face to face about because they're embarrassed or they feel like they shouldn't have this issue or shouldn't talk about it. So from like accessibility, breaking some shame barriers, I really see this world where it's like a foot in the door for people finding these tools that they otherwise wouldn't get. So I hope that's the vision that I'm forecasting. One vision, yeah. And then on that last point, what you're talking about is like the feel good of not, for people not to forget how good it feels when you do something hard and you do it well. You kind of like stick the landing, like you did that. You did that application all on your own. You wrote that whole essay on your own. I'm kind of appreciating, I used to be really self-critical about spelling errors and little typos. And now when I have them, I'm like, see, it's me, it's a human behind here. I didn't put this into chat. I really worked hard. And just kind of like that reward of when we work hard for something that, the neurochemical benefits and that feel good. Hoping people like don't lose sight of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. It's such a big question, and there's so much happening so fast. But I think the lens that I see this through is I have this really unique position right now as a coach, just because I'm working with people all around the world and with people who are at the epicenter of this AI wave, this revolution that's happening for humanity. And then I work people all the way out past the furthest distance where they wouldn't even feel a shockwave yet because they're behind these barriers like defense, right? Where they're not allowed to use AI yet or to use any of these tools because it doesn't adhere to the protocols that are in place to protect us, keep us safe, that kind of thing. And so, I have some teams that are what we call like AI native. They are the people who are creating the AI and they're adapting it first. And I've seen some really amazing implementations already where they have like Claude bots running on these dedicated machines and they're acting as EAs and solving all the tech debt, all these things that have been on the back burner that haven't been able to be resolved yet. But I think the question that you're really getting at is this like existential component to life as we know it and this sense of purpose that humans get through their work. And I think there's this perception of a real and imminent threat to, will I be able to keep doing the work that I love? Will I have a future with this? As AI emerges and it gets really good at doing certain components, like if you're an engineer, for example, it's a real, Arul, I saw you like shake your head. Like, yeah, it's a real moment where a lot of people are confronting, like, will I even have a job? Do I even still have a job? So on the optimistic side of things, I think, okay, maybe it's not so optimistic. Like, just like the Industrial Revolution, I think we are going to see a falling away of certain types of work that AI can now do for us, right? That can help, especially small businesses, do more, go further, and do better and greater things because they don't have to have so many full-time employees, especially in states like California, that make it really difficult to sustain that as a small business. So that could be like, it's both a blessing and a curse, My most hopeful vision for this, though, is that everybody has an opportunity to think about what it really is that is their superpower as a human. Right? What is the thing that you love, that you are just so lit up by doing? And how can you plug yourself into work where you can do that? And how can we, kind of like I mentioned earlier, get the best out of both what humans can do and what AI can do? And it reminds me a little bit of like when Amazon first came on the scene and everybody was like, all the bookstores are gonna die. And then they didn't, though. A lot of them did. A lot of them folded. But there's still an immense culture around books. And so I think it's easy to fall into this binary place of we're all going to lose our jobs and universal basic income and no one's going to work and it's just all going to be, but I think there's a lot of gray space in between. And so it seems like from my worldview, especially the technical employees, the ones who are thriving right now are the ones who are showing their leaders that they're adaptable, that they're embracing what's coming and they're trying their best to figure it out and figure out what's going to have the greatest impact for their work or their company or their team, resisting it. And And it also seems like, you know, I think there's a really specific application, just even within like business in particular. Like I coach CEOs, and one of the hardest things to do is to cascade those learnings throughout teams. So it's like, I think there's a real opportunity for teams to be consulting a chatbot and be like, hey, we're really trying to stick the landing on this new way of working, and we're getting stuck here. Can you help us? What's the next step? You know?
That is super interesting, though. I think it's so cool to hear both of your takes because I feel like everybody's interacting with AI differently, so they're imagining this future differently. But I think both of you touched on this, and I think we agree that this human-to-human relationship is just going to be so much more impactful and so much more meaningful. And I'm sure things in the periphery will change. Some jobs will go, new jobs will come, and like those kind of things will move around. But I'm really excited that I think, people think like, oh, AI is going to replace this human connection, but I think it's actually going to make human connection even more valuable. So that'll be a really positive thing for the world.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's beautiful to hear you say that because like already people like coming out of the pandemic, we're feeling so isolated, and so I think people have really realized just how meaningful that is to have this real connection with other humans. And so I think some companies are going to double down on that and double down on the humans, even when they have the choice for AI. And then I think others will double down on AI and consumers get to choose, what they want to support. So we all have a choice in how we engage with this. And if you're feeling existential threat, I would love to take this moment to be like, do you have a therapist in your corner you can talk to? Who are you talking to about that? Like, you're not alone in this. Like,
Yeah, and I like that we named earlier to the ethical use of AI. Like, what am I using it for? What's is it even as a company, right? I'm employing this AI model. What am I keeping my people? What does this look like? How do we do this in a way that's in alignment with our values and our bigger goals? So I'm happy that we named that earlier. I think that's going to be an ongoing, growing conversation for everyone out there.
Absolutely.
Well, I love this conversation so much. Thank you so much for being here. If people want to find you, learn more about what you're doing, where can they go for that? And any other resources you want to plug before we end for today?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a website, circuitbreakerlabs.ai. Definitely like all our contact information and everything is on there. You can also reach Arul and myself over email. It's just our first name at circuitbreakerlabs.ai. We love to hear from anyone excited about this space, especially like people who are thinking about how they're using AI, clinicians who want to be part of this effort. We love working with you all and are eager to just chat with people who are thinking about how we scale AI quickly but responsibly. So yeah, we'd love to connect with anybody. We have a white paper talking more about this as well on our website if that's of interest. But we just want to thank you again for having us on your podcast, giving us space to share this information. And I think we both really enjoyed the conversation. So yeah, so excited to be able to do this with you both.
thank you. It's so nice to know you're out there doing the work that you do.
I know.
And based on your white paper, saving companies a lot of money in the testing process and making it even better. So come on, win-win, everybody. Win-win. Yeah. And are there any resources that come to mind that you would recommend people to help them understand more about what's going on behind the screen with AI?
I love that. I love the behind the screen. I think honestly, as you're looking at different AI systems and how you want to engage with them, the best resource can be looking at that company's website, seeing what they're saying they're doing for safety, and if they're not, asking them. I think as consumers to really encourage more and more people to care about safety, if we ask these questions and make the hesitations that we have aware, people know and can fix them. And I think a lot of the developers that we work with are very keen and interested in helping make sure their users trust the tool that they're building. And so I think just being more vocal and reaching out to people and saying that we want to see the safety, we want to understand what you're doing, will really help push this space forward.
Yeah, thank you. All right, you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We're so glad you're here. If you like this episode, please rate, share, or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Check us out on social at The Skills Podcast or On Point Practice, and check out our website at theonpointpractice.com. Until next time.